What's something you've seen but could never explain? Story 1. In my early 20s, I was home alone. I woke up to my cell phone ringing but missed the call. The cell phone number I missed the call from was my home phone number. I got up and found the cordless phone on the kitchen counter. I looked everywhere, but no one was in the house and the doors were all locked. One time when I was like 16, I got a call from my dad asking if I was okay and if I were in trouble. I told him I was fine, but asked what he meant, and he told me he'd just gotten a strange call. He explained that someone asked if it was my dad by his name, and when he said yes, they hung up. He tried to call back, but the line was disconnected. He looked it up and saw it was the number of the police station of the town I lived in. I lived in a different city in a different part of the state. We still have no explanation as to how they knew his name or what happened. One time I FaceTimed my dad. It even showed dad on the screen, but an older woman, like grandmother age, picked up. I asked who she was, and she asked who I was. Very sweet about it. I said I was trying to call my dad and didn't know how I rang her, since my screen still said dad. She was so lovely. My cat was sitting on my lap and she asked to see him and laughed about how cute he was, and then wished me a good night. I hung up and tried my dad again, at the same contact, and he picked up. I have no idea how or why that happened. The two with odd connections seem easy to explain by crossed wires. Some accident of technology. The one knowing the dad's name? Maybe a prank call? Story 2. Shortly after my mother passed away, I was going through and organizing her belongings in her room. I was talking out loud as if I were talking to her. There were some boxes with family photo albums I'd been looking for that I hadn't been able to find, and it was really worrying me. I was sitting on the floor and said aloud, "Where did you leave those albums, Mom?" Very slowly, her closet door opened on its own. A slow creaking movement from nearly totally closed to halfway open. I was as terrified as I'd ever been in my life. I froze and didn't move, but I looked at exactly eye level and there was a cardboard box labeled albums in my mother's handwriting on the lower shelf of the closet. I'm not a religious or even spiritual person, and I thought there might be some imbalance in the hanging of the closet door. I went back to the door many times and tested it by wiggling it back and forth and leaving it in different positions, but it never moved that way since. That's really cool. Would be terrifying to have been there, but still a cool story. My dad had a similar experience about a week after my mom died. He said a dresser drawer where she kept a few things rattled all by itself. By rattled, I assumed he meant something subtle, but then he actually showed me how it was, and it was like the drawer was trying to shake the dresser apart. I probably would have run out of the house. Same thing happened to my girlfriend after her dad passed away. Her and her sister couldn't find a key for his camper, and she said out loud, "Dad, where did you put them?" And out of the blue, the keys were on the table. This would scare me, but I'd also probably be fascinated and start asking a bunch of questions. Story 3. Not me, but my dad. When I was younger, my biological mom and her husband kidnapped me and took off to another state. My dad said that he had finally started to accept that he may never see me again after nearly a year of searching. And then one day when he was on a walk, this little girl came up to him and asked, "Are you looking for a little girl?" He looked at her, confused, and she just turned around and pointed up the block at a group of kids playing, and said, "She's right there." He walked closer, past the girl, to try and get a better look and saw me in the group. He turned around to figure out what the little girl's deal was, and she was just gone, without a trace. Turns out my bio mom and her husband had come back to visit family for whatever reason. I used to not believe it because the story is just so insane, but throughout the years, it's one story of my dad's that has never changed. Not one detail. He told it so many times that I can recite it word for word, and he's always so awestruck when he tells it. Like I can almost see him racking his brain, searching for the most logical explanation. I was about 2 or 3 when it happened, and now I'm 26. He still can't piece it together to this day. I wonder if you as a child just told the other kids the tale offhandedly while playing, and this little girl just said it to the first dad-type guy she saw. I've been the little girl in the situation. I can't explain her knowing their child was there, but I do believe that some people broadcast. I've had 2 experiences about this. One time, when I was a teenager, I was having a little interaction with a stranger, an adult man. I was with a friend and we were getting directions home from a city we weren't familiar with. This was well before cell phones and when people used to ask strangers for directions sometimes. Our eyes met and I felt this knowledge that he was at odds with his wife and in danger of marriage. marriage ending. They were living separately, and it had just happened recently. He was devastated. I felt an overpowering urge to tell him that he had to go to her and calmly explain himself fully and honestly, and have a completely open conversation with her. I was a very shy, awkward teenager, and he was a grown man and a stranger, so I didn't have the nerve to actually say anything. But as a kid might not have that conditioning, be painfully shy the way I was, I don't think I have any sort of special ability or anything like that. I think it was him, because it happened another time, but something very lighthearted. A group was having a guess the number of jelly beans in this jar and win it contest. The young lady manning the booth at the time I passed by was strongly encouraging me to enter for fun. I don't even like jelly beans, so I was declining, but she was really enthusiastically trying to convince me, and the entire time she was talking, I had the number in my head. I felt like she knew that there were 174 or whatever, so that knowledge was just sitting there in her head. And in between the two of us, I didn't want to be a party pooper and let her down. So I wrote down that number, and I won. I had guessed exactly right. I do not have luck like that, and I don't walk around thinking as though I have access to people's inner thoughts and feelings, but those two experiences felt very real and sincere. I don't have an explanation for these. I do know what it feels like to feel like I should do something for someone, like a time I saw someone mowing a business's lawn and I thought I should take him some water. It wasn't just a fleeting thought of here's an opportunity to do a random act of kindness. It was an impression, a certainty. I didn't do it though. I wish I had, even if he thought it was odd. Story 4. When I was about 19 or 20 and first living on my own, I woke up in the middle of the night once to a pitch black room, but realized I could see, as if everything in my room was subtly outlined in a reddish glow. I closed my eyes and could still see the exact same thing. I then covered my eyes with my hands, but could still see. I even got up and tested it by walking around my house with my eyes closed and was able to navigate all around all the obstacles, and even see things like cups on the counters, and was able to pick them up without missing them. After a little bit of this, I turned on the light to confirm everything was where it was, and when I turned the lights back off, the effect was gone. Overall, it lasted about 10 minutes and has never happened again. My best guess is that I was still half dreaming and my brain was just able to very accurately represent my memory of where everything was. But even if that's the case, I'm very impressed with my brain's half-asleep ability to form a full 3D representation of my environment as I'm moving and manipulating small objects. Either that or I discovered a latent superpower. It's amazing when you realize the details you can remember. I had myself hypnotized one time by a therapist, and I imagined leaving my body and flying around. I decided to go visit my childhood home. As I zoomed through the neighborhood, I saw all kinds of details I hadn't thought about in years. Distinctive plants, defects in brickwork, etc. Then when I flew through my front door and into the family room, I saw the speckled floor pattern, a wooden bucket my parents used to use as a magazine stand, pictures on the walls I had forgotten about. It was all there, so apparently it was in my head even though I hadn't accessed it in more than 20 years. I sometimes get false awakenings. What basically happens is I wake up and start going about my day, but at some point I'll try to use a light switch or use my phone and it won't work no matter how much I try. Eventually I realize I'm dreaming and then wake up for real. Occasionally I get into a cycle where this happens a few times before I actually wake up. The suspicious part of me says maybe this is some deep brain sleep level thing going on. As you can see, I'm not a neuroscientist who can explain this. I only make conjectures on the interwebs. Story 5. My nephew was pointing at a picture on the wall saying boo and laughing. Then the picture fell onto the desk below it. About a decade ago, I was watching some videos on aliens and I had a fake Area 51 warning picture hanging in my room. It flew off the wall and hit my shoulder. It hurt too because it was heavy. It was flat against the wall and I still have no idea how it moved forward to hit me. I had my snowboard in the living room casually resting on the wall, at least a few months after I bought it for the upcoming season, and I made a gunshot gesture with my hands towards it. As soon as I shifted my gaze away, the thing slided on the left and fell down. The snowboard was not even touched for a few months. Coincidence? Playful decorations with a sense of humor? Or playful poltergeists? We may never know. Story 6. Actually, I still don't understand the concept of deja vu. It happens to me about twice a year since I was around 18 years old. I'm 44. Just random places or experiences that I swear I've seen and have been through before. It's so strange. Have you ever had a sort of meta deja vu? A moment of deja vu and all that familiarity and everything you said, but then a memory of something far off yet to happen? And when you experience that second thing, however later, you know exactly when you first recalled it before it had happened? I've had that very few times in my life and know nobody else who has. Adding to that, while I think about it, years ago I went on a date or two with someone I'd met when very suddenly I ended up running into someone else I'd had a crush on for a very long time. I had to explain to the date that I was calling it off, but tried to white lie my way out to save her feelings, I suppose. I ended up spinning some very odd yarn about a toxic relationship I'd just gotten out of, with a heap of details from nowhere, and came away afterwards wondering where on earth half of it had come from. It was a work of absolute imagination and very, very unnecessary in every way. I sort of wrote it off then. A year later, things fell off the rails in the relationship I ended up developing with that same crush. Every last detail lined up with the bull that I'd thoughtlessly spouted. I've had that. I've had dreams where I'll be doing something or talking to someone that I remember because it's out of the ordinary for me. Then years later, when it happens, I'll remember having the dream separately from the deja vu feeling itself. Like an, oh dang, this is what that dream was all about. This has happened with jobs I've had and people I've met. I've had moments of deja vu, and it's usually something I've dreamt. It's never anything important or life-changing in any way. It's just something mundane, like I had a dream where you were telling me a story about a neighbor's job. Story 7. A tree fell in front of us while we were driving. It almost killed us. Moments later, a group of men dressed in nice clothes just happened to have chainsaws with them in a black car with black tinted windows. They started cutting up the tree. We quickly turned around and said, nope. I tried to tell myself that it was just Mormons who happened to have chainsaws in the back of their car. I called my mom the other day to see if she still remembers that incident, and she does. Now, if it had been a redneck in a pickup truck, I'd totally believe they already had a chainsaw in the back and were willing to cut up the tree because they're usually helpful like that. But a group of guys in nice clothes with a chainsaw is disturbing. Something like this happened to me a couple of years ago. I was heading to a wedding down a dirt road, pulled up to a few vehicles stopped because a big oak was across the road. For context, I'm an arborist and have a tree service company. I saw what was up, ran back to my truck, whipped off all my dress clothes, threw on my change of clothes, chaps, etc., and grabbed my saw that I always keep in my truck lockbox. I bucked a gap big enough for people to get through. People were so confused but were happy. They let me wash up at the venue. Besides the hype of the wedding, the next most talked about thing was the random dude that had a saw and cut the big oak out of nowhere. While I would appreciate these men in black appearing out of nowhere, I would have so many questions for them, just like the ghost that opens doors to find photo albums. Tell me more. Tell me more. Story 8. In college, my wife, girlfriend at the time, had a nightmare that her pet iguana, who was at home with her father, had frozen to death after being left outside. She woke up sobbing, and that woke me up. I calmed her down and told her it was just a dream. We both eventually got back to sleep. The next morning, her father called to say that her pet iguana had been left outside overnight and had frozen to death. This wasn't a recurring dream or worry for her. This was the only time it happened. Neither of us can explain the events without the aid of religion or 1 in a trillion coincidence. The night my dad died, he came to me in a dream. He told me very matter-of-factly that he had died. He was healthy in the dream, unlike in real life. He was dressed in a light gray suit with a matching Panama hat, sunglasses with a newspaper. He was sitting at a small table, like a bistro, overlooking a beach. He explained to me that all of time and space were like fibers in a muscle lattice, all running in tandem and all happening at once. Death is when you're removed from the electric impulse in the lattice and become the lattice itself. He told me the rest of my life will seem long to me, but will only be moments for him, and when I die, we will see each other again. We said our goodbyes, and my mom woke me up. She told me, your father passed away, through tears and a shaking voice. I said, when? Thinking this was something that had happened a long time ago. She said she didn't know, and it took the better part of an hour to realize that it had happened that night. I'm almost the same age now as he was when I was born. This happened nearly 20 years ago, but I remember that dream quite vividly. The next year after his death is almost entirely a blur. When I was a soldier, about 17 at the time, we were on a military exercise. At night, we do sentry duty in 2-hour shifts. One morning, the boss, Major, came out to our unit and took aside one of the guys. They talked for a short while and then both drove off. We had no idea what was up. It was then that someone in my section told me that he had a strange dream, which happened when he had fallen asleep on his 2-hour sentry shift. In it, a woman came to him and told him to sleep and that everything was okay, and to not wake the soldier who was next on shift, the one who ended up driving away with the boss. The exercise was shortly canceled early, and we were transported back to base. We found out a little later that the soldier who had been picked up had lost his mother that night in a car accident. He was devastated, but also told us he knew before the major had come to tell him, because his mother appeared to him in a dream and told him not to worry, that she was dead, and that she was okay and happy. He was super messed up for years because they were very close, but he went on to have a good life. Not just deja vu dreams, but premonition dreams of people and pets passing is interesting to me. I like how the father explained that life is short and just part of existence, and mom said that everything is okay and that she's happy. That would be very comforting to hear from such loved ones. Story 9. My mom had a dream where a little boy walked into their bedroom and said, "Tell my mommy and daddy I'll be okay." She woke up to the phone ringing. It was her close friend calling her and telling her that their newborn had passed away. The baby died of SIDS. Similar thing happened to me. I had a dream where I called my uncle's house and the housekeeper answered and we spoke to each other in fluent Spanish. I hadn't spoken Spanish in years, but did spend a month in Mexico 20 or so years prior, so that wasn't that strange. However, my uncle never had a housekeeper, so that was a little odd, but I just chalked it up to a dream being weird. Anyway, about a week later, I mentioned the dream to my uncle because I was so happy that my Spanish was still somewhere in my brain. He tells me that he just hired a Spanish-speaking housekeeper that started cleaning his house the week prior. There's no way I could have known that. Pretty mundane viewing, but strange nonetheless. When I was 13, I went to a concert with my parents. About midway through, apropos of nothing in particular, I had a thought of my grandfather. He lived a good 800 kilometers away in a nursing home from a stroke several years earlier, and had not been experiencing any unusual health problems lately. I hadn't seen him in months, so there was no particular thing that triggered that thought. After we got out, my mother also brought him up. She had a similar thought of him pass through her mind. When we got home, we had a message on our answering machine from the nursing home saying that he died that night of a heart attack, right around the time we were in the concert. Having information you really shouldn't know? Check. And the baby? I'd have goosebumps for weeks because of that. Story 10. When I was 18 years old, I was driving home from a friend's house with another friend. We were on the highway doing about 110 kilometers per hour, or about 70 miles per hour, and made this trip often. It's a big highway between two towns, so just fields on either side. Something on two legs ran alongside my car. I saw it in my rearview mirror and out my side window. It was not a kangaroo. It was human-like, had long arms and obviously extremely fast. My friend saw it too. Then it just went off the road back into the grass. Neither of us could explain it. My friend told me about something like that, but it was really unnervingly slow. Said he was out riding his ATV in the mountains with his dad one night when all of a sudden his ATV just came to a sudden halt for no reason. He was looking down trying to figure out what was going on when something out of the corner of his eye got his attention, and when he looked up there was something like a tall, he said it had to be at least 6'3", lanky coyote with disgusting long arms walking slowly across the path in front of him, twitching its head in random directions and breathing heavy. He told me that it never once looked in his direction while it was walking, despite his bright headlights beaming at it and its head twitching everywhere. It just kept awkwardly dragging itself across the road until it reached some brush on the other side, and it slowly knelt down and disappeared. He's not really a liar, so I know he wasn't just making up things to spook people. He to this day still says it's the single scariest thing he's ever seen. My dad saw something like this. Sister was visiting around 1982. Parents live in a rural area. When she went to drive into the nearest city, her car broke down in front of a house my parents knew. She called Dad. He picked her up and started driving home. They're just chatting about the car when all of a sudden they hear an ungodly loud scream. He slams on the brakes and a coyote or wolf walks across the road on two legs. It's like 6 or 7 feet tall. And after it does, they hear the scream again even louder and they drove home. They never saw or heard anything like that again. Have you ever heard of skinwalkers? I've heard of them but have never seen one. I prefer to never see one. On that note, I'm going to stop talking about it now. It really creeps me out. Story 11. I think I was 14 at the time, living in a nice part of a very busy city. I woke up, had breakfast, and waited for my parents to come downstairs. They didn't come. I looked for them, but couldn't find them. Couldn't find my sisters either. I went outside and there was no one. Literally 0 people in an incredibly busy area on the weekend. I panicked fully. I looked everywhere for people, but they just weren't there. I fully freaked out thinking everyone disappeared. I even checked if there was something on TV about it. There was live TV with people, so I calmed down a bit. Other people still existed. I think it was around afternoon when I stopped looking around and walked home. When I got home, my parents and sister were luckily there. They insisted they were in and around the house all day, and I even saw them at breakfast. I broke down crying because it was simply not true. To this day, I swear people disappeared for half a day. After my breakdown, we went for ice cream and my city was busy again. Hundreds of people doing their thing. I have no clue what happened, but I feel gaslighted by life. One time I stepped out of my building into the complex parking lot and it was silent. No traffic on the busy street, no birds, no distant music. I had a solid minute of thinking I missed the apocalypse while I was working from home that day. I was about to post a story of basically the exact same experience. I wonder if it could be a shared experience. Felt like a glitch in the universe or something. I've had moments of silence that felt like movie apocalypse silence, but not longer than a few seconds. I'm wondering if this is a dream type of thing. Dissociation? Story 12. In my old townhouse, the bedrooms had L-shaped door handles. I lived alone, and it was a 2-story townhouse with the bedrooms upstairs. Had multiple nights where I'd be lying in bed watching YouTube videos on my iPad, when my door handle would twist and the door would slowly open. The first time I thought someone broke in. Each subsequent time I'd go through the townhouse and no one was there. The hallway light, which was also their stair light, had a switch at the bottom of the stairs and top that controlled the same light. Multiple times while in bed, the light would turn on, so I'd get up, do a search of the entire house, nothing there. Then the TV would turn on in the living room at the same point, and I'd wake up and walk downstairs to the TV being on. This went on for months and I eventually moved. Nothing like this occurs in my current apartment, but could never explain what was happening. Could be something wrong with the electrical circuits in the house that causes lights or TV to come on or off. Okay, now explain the door opening. Oh, that one's just a ghost. See, there you go. There's your explanation. Story 13. I was standing on the seaside walkway with a bunch of other people watching the sunset. A red orb came speeding down the coastline at like 50 to 150 meters altitude. Didn't think much of it until it instantly stopped and speeded back the way it came until it was out of sight. No noise, too low for a plane or helicopter, and wasn't a flare because it was flying fast. Stopped instantly and then flew back the way it came. Several people saw it, but this was before mobile phones with cameras were mainstream. I've seen the same thing, but in red and green. It was probably around 1 a.m. I was outside with my 2 friends, but when I saw it, I was alone. I looked out at the sky over a few houses and I saw a red ball/diamond looking thing, and I thought it was a meteor or shooting star at first, but it also had this long disappearing green trail following it. The thing shot down into the middle of the sky, then shot right back up just as fast. It was super quick and over in like 2 seconds. Crazy. In like 1993 or 94, I saw the exact same thing. This is the first time I'm hearing the story from anyone else, and it's multiple people. What part of the globe? It was incredibly fast moving, just above the treetops, and it was almost like green glitter. Was just around sundown because I remember the sky was dark, but my bedtime was early since I was only a kid. Some of the commenters say it could have been a meteorite, but who am I to say? Story 14. I worked as an under-butler in a large Scottish castle in the early 2000s. One night, I was the only person in the house and decided to throw a load of laundry in before bed. I walked down to the surface hallway into the ironing room and from there to the washing machine room. I got my laundry in and then started to leave. I turned the lights off in the washing machine room and suddenly everything was black. The lights weren't on in the ironing room. My first thought was, it's weird that I didn't turn the lights on in here when I came in, but they aren't on, so obviously I didn't. The ironing room had huge ironing tables the size of snooker tables, and as I started to walk through, I kept bumping into them. After a couple of times of bumping into them, I was suddenly filled with a terrible, accompanied watched, spine-tingling feeling that someone was there, and to not look towards the sewing room, another room that came off from the ironing room. I fumbled my way through the ironing room back to the service hall in a panic. The hall lights were on and everything was fine. That is the whole story. I didn't see anything. However, there there are some problems. To this day, I am confident that I turned the lights on in the ironing room when I went in. It wasn't possible to move through the room without bumping into things a bunch of times, as my exit demonstrated. The light in the ironing room was controlled by a large switch that made a loud clicking noise. I didn't hear it click off when I was in the washing room. In the days that followed, the family and the butler returned home and I had forgotten about the entire incident. A week or so later, I suddenly remembered it happening and said to the butler, "I've never heard of any ghost stories at the castle. Are there any?" He kind of dismissively said, "Oh, they say there's a white lady in the ballroom and a bedroom is apparently haunted, but that's it. Oh, and they say the sewing room is haunted." I kind of gasped and told the butler the story. He seemed fascinated. He told the family and a couple of them agreed that the laundry room was unsettling. I don't believe in ghosts, and I think it was likely an unfortunately timed electrical fault and an overactive imagination. Still, I'll never forget how sudden and strong the feeling of a presence was when fumbling my way out of the ironing room. I was with my then girlfriend at a hotel in Connecticut about 10 years ago. The heat was broken in our room for some reason, so they opened a door to another adjoining room. She and I watched TV, but I started to feel like something was standing in the doorway from the other room, like I was being watched, like you said. Eventually, she and I went into the room to get some sleep, but we were tossing and turning. We both got up, but I looked out the window and she was on the other side of the bed. I looked out onto the grounds of the hotel and it looked like we were in a different place. That's the only way I can describe it, like the hotel had moved. I looked into the mirror and I was looking at myself, but not myself. I did not recognize myself in the mirror. I turned to my ex and she was absolutely terrified. Her eyes were wide and skin was white, so we left and drove an hour to stay with family friends. Along the way, we recounted our experience and both had the same experience. Who knows what we don't know truly? Oh mate, I know that terrible feeling that there's something else present. I had it in a building I used to work in, which was in one of UK's Roman cities. It was the oldest building there and had a Roman building as its cellar, and the rest on top was Tudor. The shop has a back section where I'd have to go get stock, and there was a really old oven in it. One day I was in there perfectly alone, the only person in the entire building, when something tapped me sharply on the shoulder. I felt it as strongly as if it were a person, which of course it wasn't. There were too many ghost stories attached to the place to attribute it to one of them, but one story was that the Roundheads had decapitated a woman in there during the English Civil War. I was an under-butler in a large Scottish castle is the best way to start a story about ghosts. Someone suggested in the hotel story that they may have had carbon monoxide poisoning. Possible, I suppose. I don't know who tapped the other guy on the shoulder. Not a big old spider, I bet. Story 15. A drive that usually takes me less than 3 hours took me more than 4 once. I don't know how it happened. No traffic, didn't take the wrong path, didn't see anything strange in the road, same speed as usual. Everything was normal until I noticed it was starting to get dark. Then checked the clock and freaked out. My friend and I repeated the same miles on a road once with no noticeable interruption, like 10 minutes apart. We were completely sober and driving back to the town we went to college in. You know when you make a drive a lot and know all the road signs and kind of subconsciously check them off as you go by? Well, just after we drove through one town on our way back, there was a sign that says X in 29 miles. I saw that sign and my friend and I were talking, but then it felt like we had driven another 10 minutes or so at least, and we went by the same sign again. It freaked me out, and I remember butting into whatever conversation we were having and asking how long it had been since we had driven through the last town. And then he got a real weird look on his face, too, as he realized we were literally still 29 miles away and just got outside the town we thought we had left 10 to 15 minutes earlier. And we were on the interstate. There's no way we could have just gotten turned around. No idea how to explain it to this day. I'm just glad someone else experienced it with me. I heard of a family once who went to a movie at 2 p.m. The person telling me remembered a lot of specifics, as going to that movie matinee was their chosen birthday celebration. Came out of the movie and were confused as it was dark. This is before cell phones and no one had a watch on. Got to the car, which had a dash clock, and it was a bit after 9. They were all completely freaked out and never spoke of it to each other again. Usually if I lose time, it's because I'm napping. Not these guys. It's the movie one that really surprises me, because you'd notice if you were watching the same movie over again and the employees would shoo you out after watching it once. So I don't get it. Only a few of these have a plausible explanation, other than the freaky ghost, UFO, time shift glitch in the universe ESP, conclusions that we could accept if we want to. Also, note to self, don't record these types of stories late at night, like I'm doing tonight. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story that you would like to share, please leave it down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.